Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Before we begin, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple applications you can use. You can expand each widget by clicking on the Maximize icon at the top right of the widget, or by dragging the bottom right corner of the widget panel. Additional materials, including a copy of today's slide deck, is available in the Resource List widget, indicated by the green file icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your questions. You can submit questions anytime throughout the webinar. You do not have to wait to the Q&A session. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. You can also submit technical issues via the Q&A widget. Please note, most technical issues can be resolved by pressing F5 or Command-R on Mac's Refresh Your Player console. Finally, an on-demand version of the webcast will be available one day after the webcast using the same link to join today's event. A full 508 compliant version of today's webcast will be available in 1 week from the REL Mid-Atlantic website. Now I introduce Brian Gill. Brian, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. So I'm Brian Gill, and I am the director of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Educational Laboratory, or the REL as we call it. For those of you who are unfamiliar with REL's regional laboratories, they're funded by the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education to provide research and analytic support to states, to school districts, and to other education stakeholders in their regions. There are 10 of them across the country. Our lab, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Lab, is operated by Mathematica, and we serve educators and policymakers providing research and analytic support in New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, DC, and Maryland. I'm pleased to be with you today and to have the opportunity to introduce some of my colleagues who have been working with our partners in New Jersey to get a better understanding about promising practices in supporting student engagement in the remote and hybrid learning environments that we're all, so many of us anyway, are operating in now. So let me tell you who you're going to be hearing from today. So first of all, from the REL team at Mathematica, you'll be hearing from our co-leads, Felicia Hurwitz and Kevin Kelly. And then from our partners at the New Jersey Department of Education, we'll hear from Tanya Breland, Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Academics, and Diana Pesciulli, Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Performance. Then finally, we'll get some perspective, some local perspective from Tracy Marinelli, who is Superintendent of the public schools in Little Falls Township. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. And now I'm going to turn it over to Diana Pesciulli for some opening comments.
Thank you, Brian. And on behalf of the New Jersey Department of Education, I want to thank the REL and the staff at Mathematica for your collaboration and for your infectious passion for bringing research to practice. We really appreciate working with you. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Tanya Breland, whom you'll hear from later. And then behind the scenes, we had Ken Bond, Kwame Floyd, and most importantly, Peter Frank, who is the reason that we're here and really brought it all together for us. I'd finally like to thank the educators who are watching this. We are so grateful for your time here today, for your obvious dedication to continually improving your practice, particularly in a variety of settings that seem to change day by day. And also for your just demonstration of the resilience and dedication you've shown us throughout the year in particular. We really appreciate you and your work, and we're proud that today's work and promising practices comes from districts, educators like you from across the state. We looked at districts small, large, and also a small sampling from the northern region, central region, and south region, as well as districts that serve diverse groups of students. So we hope today is a conversation starter. It's part of your professional learning, and that we can continue to do our best at the department to connect you to as many resources as possible as you help support your very precious students. So we hope you enjoy, and thank you. I'm going to now hand it over to Felicia Horowitz. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Diana. It's great to be here with everyone. So now that we've welcomed you all here today, we're going to begin by describing the background for this work, and then we'll explore 6 factors that we use to understand student engagement in remote and hybrid learning environments. After that, we'll hear from a superintendent about her experiences related to supporting student engagement during the pandemic. And finally, we'll have some time at the end to answer some of your questions. So now we're going to just dive right into the background, as I mentioned. And since early 2020, the spread of COVID-19 has dramatically affected education and learning practices throughout the country and world. And it's caused states, districts, and schools to reconsider how to safely and effectively meet the needs of their students and staff. And so one element that's been particularly challenging during this time is promoting and maintaining student engagement. Student engagement is a critical component of students' learning experiences, as rigorous studies have shown that it can impact academic achievement and social-emotional competencies. Like other states, the New Jersey Department of Education recognized the importance of maintaining strong student engagement regardless of a student's learning environment. And so to better equip themselves with knowledge to support their districts and schools, the department have engaged with the REL Mid-Atlantic. And so through our work together, we've developed the following research question. What are promising strategies to promote student engagement in remote and hybrid learning environments? And so by answering this question, we hope to support districts and schools' work to build and maintain student engagement for their students. So we used a 3-pronged approach to collect information so we could answer the question I just raised. So first, back in April, the REL Mid-Atlantic conducted a literature scan, looking for studies, specifically literature reviews or rigorous studies involving a comparison group, written in the last 10 years, that grappled with the effectiveness of remote or blended learning, and remote and blended learning practices in K-12 settings. As part of our current work, we expanded this search to identify any additional relevant articles and added a special focus on student engagement in remote and hybrid learning environments. Second, we held a series of conversations with districts and state leaders throughout New Jersey because we wanted to understand their perceptions on student engagement in remote settings. So we talked with both district and state level staff to learn more about how schools and districts across the state better understand strategies that were put into place while operating in remote and hybrid learning environments. And so while the people we talked with do not capture all of New Jersey by the numbers, they are representative of the varying district sizes, geography, and diversity across the state. But to protect participant anonymity, we will not align anything we share today with a particular district or participant. And finally, we conducted an environmental scan of publications in education databases, blogs, media outlets, and other relevant sources to understand strategies related to student engagement that have been carried out outside of New Jersey. So to answer our research question, we identified 6 factors that relate to student engagement. These factors were based on our review of the evidence, the environment, and our conversations within New Jersey. So the first factor we'll discuss today is instructional delivery. Here, we're thinking about the ways that teachers and other instructional leaders deliver lessons and use activities to support their students' learning. This can occur through both synchronous strategies, where the teacher and students are live together, either in person or via virtual platform, and asynchronous strategies, where students are engaged in learning activities without the live support of a teacher. The next factor is technology access and use. This includes the ways that technology is made accessible to students, families, and staff, and how it can be used to deliver instruction, communicate, and monitor progress and participation. So the third factor is staffing and professional development. This factor covers the strategies that schools and districts are using to staff both virtual classes and in-person classes in hybrid settings, and how districts are preparing their staff to support remote and hybrid learning through targeted professional development. And then we have family engagement, which involves the ways in which districts and schools, including district leadership, principals, teachers, and others, are interacting with students' families to support their students' engagement in learning. And then the next factor is extracurricular activities. So here we're thinking about any activities that districts and schools use to engage students outside of instructional time to promote students' learning and interactions. This might be through sports or clubs for students, but it could also include any kind of events or programs for students and families. And the final factor is supporting students' social and emotional learning. The importance of supporting students' social and emotional needs came up regularly as a critical piece of students' learning experiences, especially during this time, as many students are experiencing a heightened need for non-academic support. But we want to acknowledge that in reality, many of these factors complement one another or even depend on one another. For example, online instructional delivery depends on having functioning technology that students are able to access, and that access might not be able to occur if they have families engaged that can't support their students to log into the system. So these factors are less of siloed boxes, but more like pieces of a puzzle or gears that come together to support a student's ability to engage in their learning. Because student engagement includes so many pieces that relate to one another, we don't believe that there is one strategy that can be implemented to improve it. Instead, districts and schools must work to address each of these different factors. If one piece of the puzzle is missing, or one gear is churning along the way very weakly, a student's ability to engage is limited. So by better understanding how to support each of these 6 factors in remote and hybrid learning environments, we hope to help states, districts, and schools to better understand how to promote student engagement at large. So to identify promising strategies within each factor that we'll discuss today, we examine the information that we collected across our 3 sources of information. So that's the literature scan, the environmental scan, and our interviews and conversations with New Jersey Department of Education and district staff. We then identified themes across those findings. For example, we wanted to know about the strategies that came up multiple times. And so those themes are the promising strategies that we'll discuss today. And while we'd like to say that everything we'll discuss today is supported by rigorous evidence, the reality is there's very little rigorous evidence on supporting K-12 student engagement in remote settings. These rigorous studies that do exist primarily focus on test scores rather than other measures of engagement, and none of them were carried out during the COVID-19 pandemic. We included the rigorous evidence that we did identify in developing our promising strategies, but much of what we'll talk about today are the bright spots that were raised through interviews and our environmental scan of solutions outside of New Jersey. And so we hope that these findings are useful to districts and schools as they consider the range of strategies that they can use to operate in remote and hybrid learning environments. We want to be clear, though, that for most of the strategies we'll discuss today, we can't say they've been shown to lead to improved student engagement. Instead, we can say that these are strategies that some individuals perceive to support student engagement based on their own experiences. And so now we're going to walk through promising strategies for each of the 6 factors that contribute to student engagement in remote and hybrid learning environments. And I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to get us going.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Felicia. So I get to be the one to kick us off on discussing the promising strategies within each factor. And we're going to start off with instructional delivery. So some of the key questions that we sought to address when we were thinking about this factor were things like, how can we make remote lessons engaging and interactive? And what's the right balance of synchronous and asynchronous learning activities? So we have 3 strategies here that we'd like to discuss that may help at addressing some of those challenges. So first, focus on learning activities that support student involvement, leadership, and collaboration. In a remote or hybrid setting, incorporating student involvement during instruction seems to be even more important. So for example, studies show benefits of incorporating games, competitions, challenges, things like that into learning activities, and that can help heighten engagement. As another example, project-based learning gives students an opportunity to learn and engage with content in a different way. There's also some rigorous evidence that speaks to the benefits of project-based activities. So for example, one study found that instruction involving authentic projects had positive impacts for students, particularly for English language learners. Beyond games and project-based learning, focusing on ways to help students collaborate with one another supports peer-to-peer engagement between students and helps students learn and grow. So that might include breaking students up into virtual small groups for discussions. Or another example could be to use software that allows students to leave one another anonymous feedback on their assignments. An interesting example of how to set up students to collaborate safely was that in one district that we spoke with, they partnered an in-person student with a remote student. So they would have a learning buddy, and that also helped to build the bridge across groups of students that typically would interact with one another but weren't able to this year. So our next promising strategy in this factor is to limit teacher-led lessons offered through virtual environments to less than 10 minutes. So most of the districts we spoke with reported encouraging teachers to keep their direct instruction lessons to just 8 or 10 minutes. And, shorter lessons can be more targeted. They allow time for more of the types of collaborative activities that I just discussed. And practically speaking, it's a lot easier to record and post short lessons online than longer lessons. So we'll talk about this more in just a minute, but posting lessons can be helpful for students during their asynchronous learning time. But realistically, a student's probably a lot more likely or willing to watch a video that's just a few minutes long rather than trying to watch an entire recording of a full 60-minute lecture. Another benefit of shorter lessons is that it allows time for all-important brain breaks or screen breaks, which gives everyone a break from having to fully engage with one another and virtually, and allows space for some independent learning that's connected with that synchronous learning time. So a publication that asked teachers of critical lessons that they've learned since the start of the pandemic really emphasized the need to take breaks, and that was both for the teachers themselves as well as for their students. So kind of incorporating all of this together as an example of how to design a lesson that incorporates those pieces, one New Jersey district that we spoke with encouraged teachers to use the following breakdown for a 60-minute lesson. Start with 10 minutes of direct instruction, followed by 10 minutes of just a full classroom discussion. Then follow it up with 30 minutes of small group breakout sessions, and then wrap up your session with 10 minutes of independent work. The final promising strategy that we'll go over in this factor is to develop clear interactions between synchronous and asynchronous learning activities. So when we were examining literature, we found that students in brick and mortar school buildings typically, but not always, have better outcomes than those that attend online schools or are completing online coursework. So really what that indicates to us is that synchronicity does seem to matter. However, synchronous instruction, it's not always feasible. So we were interested to learn how to improve asynchronous learning activities. So a key theme that emerged was the importance of connecting what students are learning during synchronous activities with what they should be learning during asynchronous activities. So there are a few ways to do this. Teachers could spend the first few minutes of each period going over recent asynchronous activities, so you could highlight examples of exceptional recent work, or you could correct common mistakes. Or another way to support this bridge is to make sure that you're really equipping students to succeed during asynchronous time. So that could be posting teacher office hours so that students and their families have a designated time when they know that they can contact the teacher with any questions during asynchronous learning. Or, as I mentioned just a bit ago, posting video mini lessons can also be helpful. All right, so let's move into our second factor now, which is access to and use of technology. So as Felicia noted earlier, over the past year, education has really morphed to depend on technology in order to effectively deliver instruction, communicate with families and students, and monitor progress and participation. So some of the questions that we wanted to address here were, how do we ensure that all students have access to the necessary technological supports like computers or internet access? Or what software and applications are worth the investment? And how can we support teachers, students, and families to understand and effectively use available technology? So we again have 3 promising strategies to go over here. And the first is to make technology access and use really the primary responsibility of at least one district-level employee. So several studies that we looked at reported positive effects of providing laptops to students, and many districts reported that providing access and use was a high priority. However, districts often found this really challenging to do, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. However, equipment issues have continued throughout the school year because you might need to do things like get new devices to replace old or broken ones, or you might need to acquire new assets like getting headphones for students. So something that a few districts reported doing to help meet this challenge was to set one person to be responsible for technology access and use. Now, this might require shifting that person's previous responsibilities so that they're able to really dedicate their primary attention to addressing technological needs. So beyond focusing on acquiring devices, another key responsibility of the individual is to establish partnerships that promote technology access use. That could be finding funders to fund devices or setting up partnerships like connecting with community colleges or other community organizations that could provide Wi-Fi hotspots for students. The second promising strategy is to first set goals and then invest in technology that's associated with supporting those goals. So as you likely know as educators, there's a wide array of technological software and applications available to educators. So something that might help in making investment decisions is to first establish your goals for the district and then ensure that your investments align with those goals. So for example, if a district sets a goal of maintaining and growing reading skills during remote or hybrid learning, there are several reading-focused applications and software that the district could consider. So identifying and reviewing software and applications can be another responsibility of that individual I just mentioned who's tasked with supporting technology access and use, but providing that person with as they try to narrow down the best solution to be able to meet the district or school's needs. Our final strategy on this slide is a bit broader, but it's really to focus on creating a seamless technological experience for students, families, and staff. So students, families, teachers, other staff, they likely have varying levels of comfort and experience using technology, which many of us have found out over the past year. But there are a few strategies that can be used to help ease any discomfort and support success. So for example, a district could set up a 24/7 tech help desk for those folks to reach out to with any questions. Or as another example, recording and sharing videos of key technological features could help families understand how to support their students and address common issues. Similarly, some districts focused on having tech-savvy teachers post videos of themselves using various technological applications that then other teachers in the school could see. Or they would spend a good amount of professional development time focusing on how to make best use of those applications. So the last point I'll make on this is to consider how you can support the technological needs of the populations that need the most support. So for example, many younger students might really struggle with signing on to various applications. So districts could invest in single sign-on applications so that students only have to sign into their devices once at the beginning of the day, rather than having to log into several applications throughout the day. Possibly even better, one district that we spoke with talked about investing in a software that only required students to hold up a QR code to the computer's camera. That way, younger students didn't even need to remember a username or password, and that really greatly helped the students be able to log on. All right, we'll move on to the next factor. And I do apologize that we're moving somewhat quickly. If you do have any follow-up questions on any of these points we're raising, please feel free to add those questions into your Q&A panel. So let's talk about staffing and professional development. So some of the questions we heard that really needed to be addressed with this factor are how can we adequately staff both our virtual and in-person classes? Or how do we support our experienced teachers to learn new teaching strategies in a new environment? Or how can we ensure that our teachers are collaborating effectively so that they can share ideas and tools for virtually engaging students? So the first strategy in this factor is to implement staffing models that better facilitate continuity for students in the face of ongoing changes. So implementing co-teaching models is one way to help support this continuity. If one teacher has to leave the class due to an illness or an adjustment in the school staffing structure, students will at least continue to have one similar teacher. Co-teaching might also be coupled with professional development opportunities that share how to co-teach in order to support that shared instructional relationship. One district that we spoke with talked about adding specials teachers, so arts or music teachers, for example, to serve as co-teachers in core subject classrooms. So many of the students already knew and trusted those staff, and they also bring relevant knowledge to the class that they're co-teaching. Another way to support continuity is to potentially combine classes. So a district might combine the same AP class across multiple schools, for example, or a school could combine a few sections of the same subject together. And co-teaching can work well in those environments, and it can also open up staff availability to address other staffing needs that might be needed throughout the school. The second promising strategy in this factor is to identify professional development needs and offer ample opportunities to address those needs. So because remote learning is new for most staff, researchers that have studied remote learning recommend changes to teacher preparation and PD sessions in order to support teachers in this ever-changing digital learning environment. But it might be tricky to identify professional development needs without staff actually in the building. So some districts have addressed this challenge by more regularly seeking feedback from staff on their needs through quick pulse surveys or focus groups. And then based on what's learned through those activities, school and district administrators should provide ample opportunities to address the needs of their staff. For example, district leaders could inspire creativity in their staff by using creative approaches to offer professional development. For example, one district used a PD in your PJs night, or you could also have a drive-in style professional development session for staff. So our final strategy in this factor is to signal support to teachers by emphasizing their leadership and extending flexibility. So emphasizing leadership could include having the tech-savvy teachers that I mentioned just a bit ago lead professional development sessions. Or as another example, one district implemented a distance learning committee at each grade level to help generate and share ideas. So this offers teachers a leadership opportunity to participate in that committee, and it also facilitates a gathering of similar teachers to be able to support idea sharing. So signaling teacher support might also include financially investing in their success. So this could be done by bringing business administrators to meetings with teachers to help identify strategies to fund those teachers' ideas. Or as another idea, one district that we spoke with bought carts for all of their teachers that are teaching remote classes from their classrooms. So that gives teachers access to their entire classroom to teach, rather than just feeling that they were stuck standing in front of their whiteboards. So simple investments like that can really show how schools and districts really understand teachers' challenges and want to be able to support their success. So I'll now pass it back over to Felicia to go over our final 3 factors.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So next we're going to talk about family engagement. And as you can probably imagine, engaging with families in remote and hybrid settings looks a bit different than more regular family engagement. For example, teachers that teach remote students now experience parents and other family members in their classrooms every day. And particularly for younger students, family members are highly involved in students' learning. And so some of the key challenges that came up when we explored this factor were, how can we strengthen the relationships between parents and school staff? And how can we build trust in our ability to effectively carry out remote learning? How do we engage students, parents, or guardians, or other family members who are already stretched? And how can we offer flexible communication while also setting boundaries to support our school leaders and teachers? So one study of remote learning showed that high levels of parental involvement led to higher levels of student achievement. So for this and other reasons, ensuring strong family engagement is key to supporting students' learning. The first strategy we'll discuss is to help build family engagement by using multiple touch points to inform and connect with students' families, and then using those touch points in a consistent way so that families know what to expect. For example, several districts noted that they began sending a weekly email to all families that included relevant information and announcements, along with tips for supporting their students' learning. By establishing a weekly pattern, families came to expect this email each week. Other strategies might include using social media like Instagram or Twitter, or sharing updates or sending regular texts. Beyond implementing regular communication practices, districts also must ensure that family members have access to that communication. So we heard from multiple districts that family communication technologies such as the Remind app was a helpful resource to support communication. This app uses blind dialing so that teachers are able to keep their personal cell phone numbers private while still allowing for regular family communication. And in addition, this app has strong translation software that supports communication by non-Spanish speaking teachers and their students' Spanish speaking families. The next strategy is consistently seeking feedback from families to inform ongoing plans. Our environmental scan findings and our interviews regularly brought up the need to seek feedback from families to support their ongoing plans. For example, surveys, particularly those that are short and have a targeted focus, like student workload, can inform the district's understanding of families' perceptions on that topic. In addition, convening focus groups and town halls to engage with families allows venues for parents and family members to share more detailed perspectives and raise challenges that the district can consider addressing. These can be implemented at both the school level, such as regular convenings with a principal, and at the district level, such as monthly virtual town halls with a superintendent. Several school leaders also raised the importance of individual phone calls. One district noted that regular phone calls with students' families is the factor that most influence student engagement in their schools. To make phone calls happen, one district assigned each school staff member an advisory group of around 13 students. That staff member met with their group regularly and was expected to call those students' families weekly. This spread workload across staff, kept families informed of school activities and changes, and allowed the school to experience and learn about any challenges their families were going through. The final strategy here is to build trust and support families' needs by building connections with community resources. Most families are facing barriers to engagement like food insecurity, moving houses, and working multiple jobs, which could impact their ability to engage with their students' education. One district official noted the importance of instilling a recognition in school staff that parents are trying their best, but are facing big issues that might hamper their engagement. Schools and districts have taken innovative approaches to establish and promote partnerships with other organizations and agencies during this period of remote and hybrid learning. An innovative solution that at least one New Jersey district is using is setting up partnerships with local organizations to host remote learning pods. For example, a school might enlist the support of an organization to host an area where working parents can drop their students off to be monitored by adults to engage in remote learning. These areas follow socially distanced standards and offer a space with reliable Wi-Fi for students to learn, with adults available to support instruction if needed. And so now we're going to move on to the fifth key factor, which is extracurricular activities. And we had a couple of key challenges that came up as we explored this factor. We wondered, how can schools and districts include extracurricular activities in already busy schedules? And how can extracurricular activities be converted into a remote format while also recognizing the challenges that are associated with technology burnout? And so the first promising strategy here is to use innovative scheduling solutions and existing resources to support participation in extracurricular activities. Although many staff recognize that extracurricular activities are valuable, many discontinue these offerings due to the challenges that we've just discussed. However, school and district staff should recognize and build off of the connection between offering outside activities of standard instructional classroom and student engagement and performance. So, for example, one study found positive impacts for offering virtual field trips to students. Some school and district leaders noted this connection. They recognized that many students attend schools because of extracurricular offerings and reported that when these offerings are disbanded, student attendance and participation in other activities also drop. So to show a commitment to continuing extracurricular activities, districts and schools have used innovative solutions and existing resources to continue offering activities and support their participation. Schools can consider having students set a goal for extracurricular enrichment activities, which can inform the school's offering and show a commitment to supporting ongoing participation in non-classroom activities. For example, one district reported redirecting grant funds to support materials for extracurricular activities. The school used a portion of those funds to pay for knitting equipment that could be sent to students interested in picking up that hobby. So the next strategy is to allow for student and staff-led innovation to foster extracurricular offerings. Many creative solutions for offering extracurricular and enrichment activities have come from students themselves, who are committed to seeing the continuation of the school activities they deeply value. Districts and schools should solicit feedback from students and staff who may have these ideas and support them with resources to signal their commitment. For example, one school offered a virtual prom that was organized by a group of students. To help support other creative extracurricular activities, districts and schools can work to set up partnerships between students and staff. For example, some clubs or student organizations could collaborate with one another to support activities. A club focused on video production could team up with a choir or band to have students individually record themselves performing, and then combine those performances to create a full performance. Beyond facilitating in-school partnerships, districts can consider facilitating extracurricular partnerships across schools, and state-level employees can consider establishing partnerships across counties to engage students. For example, one county developed a partnership across school districts to facilitate a group of students who wanted to have a discussion series on the race and protests. Okay, so the final key factor that we've identified is supporting students' social and emotional learning. And so some of the key challenges that came up as we explored this factor were, how can I understand my students' social and emotional needs without daily in-person interactions? And how can I support my students as they experience new difficulties and trauma due to the COVID-19 pandemic? And finally, how can I effectively utilize school staff to support vulnerable populations of students? So social and emotional learning has become a top priority in many schools and districts in recent years. And because of this, many schools have added activities to support these needs. Some of these activities can easily translate to remote settings and shouldn't be ignored or passed over for the sake of other activities. Further, one study found that increasing students' ability to manage emotions more effectively increased their time management, self-regulation, and learning performance. District and state leaders in New Jersey agreed that it's important to include such supports in remote and hybrid learning environments. For example, morning meetings with a short prompt can guide conversations around students' social and emotional needs and can continue to happen even over virtual platforms. Some districts are also using strategies like art therapy or journaling to support students' social and emotional needs. These activities can also occur over virtual platforms. For example, students can submit electronic journal entries or record audio or video entries. And now schools have made investments, particularly in technology, throughout the pandemic. These investments can pair well with supporting students' social and emotional needs. For example, a software designed to communicate with parents and guardians can be used to influence social and emotional learning. One New Jersey district sends Wellness Wednesday texts to students' families each week with a short tip on how they can support their students' social and emotional needs. So next, it's important to ensure that schools are aware of and then are able to support students' social and emotional needs. And to do this, it's important to first create a safe space for students to share their perspectives, even in a remote environment. These safe spaces also offer an opportunity to foster community and help students grow as individuals. One element for creating safe spaces in schools is to ensure that each student has a trusted adult in their school. For example, a few minutes ago, I described one district that assigned all staff an advisory group of about 13 students. These students meet regularly together to build community, and the advisory staff member is regularly checking in with each student individually and with a student's family member. These regular interactions help build a safe relationship between the student and staff member. Advisory groups like these give students a sense of belonging, validation, and a deeper understanding of themselves as learners. And then the next strategy is to invest in training and partnerships. Addressing students' social and emotional needs during remote and hybrid learning environments might take new skills that even experienced providers like social workers and counselors could grow. So one district reported holding targeted trainings with small groups of staff that can help address some of these gaps in skills. This could involve bringing in external providers to deliver these trainings. But it's important to recognize that students' needs may be greater than what district staff can manage on their own. So schools may want to consider partnerships with providers that offer mental and emotional supports that can complement the work their internal providers are already providing. And so we've just heard a lot about each of the 6 factors and the strategies that go along with each of them. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin so we can hear more from a superintendent.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Felicia. So I am really excited now to be joined by Tracy Marinelli, who is the superintendent of Little Falls Township Public Schools in Passaic County, New Jersey. So Little Falls Schools is one of New Jersey's lighthouse districts, and those are districts that the New Jersey Department of Education has recognized as having demonstrated measurable progress across diverse groups of learners. So Ms. Marinelli was named the 2020 Superintendent of the Year for both her county and her region. And her district has used several innovative approaches to engage with students over the past year. So Tracy, thank you so much for joining me today. So Tracy, my first question for you is, we just went through promising strategies for 6 key factors that are related to student engagement. And we noted that a lot of these factors really relate to one another. So as a school district leader, we've learned over the course of the pandemic and how to support student engagement in the midst of remote or hybrid learning.
Thank you, Kevin. So one of the things that we've seen that are definitely an overarching theme is clear, honest, and concise communication. Communicating with the staff, with the students, and with the parents, sending out, as was mentioned before when you were touching on the 6 modules, is being briefed to be able to capture as much data as possible to act on it immediately. We've seen that we've had no less than 83% participation in all of our surveys. We couple that with student senates where the students can come and speak about things that they'd like to see more of or see less of, things that may be worrying them. We have talk-a-lattes at night with the parents where I meet with the families to further discuss things that may have been addressed in these surveys. And I think what's so important about them and why they touch on all the 6 is that it's important so that we get a pulse on every moving part of the district to know what the staff's needs are, what the parents' needs are, and what the students' needs are, and to be able to put together a plan in all of those 6 areas that helps meet the most needs possible.
Yeah, those are some really awesome things to hear, the really high survey response rate and things like talk a latte. I think that's really, really fun. That's awesome. So it's good to hear that kind of overarching theme from you. So my next question is, we know that one challenge that many schools have faced really relates to how to staff their classrooms. So for example, how could a district navigate staffing both in-person and remote classrooms? And I think my understanding from you is that you had, I think, almost 100% teacher attendance rate throughout the pandemic, which seems to be quite remarkable, and I imagine would be remarkable to many of the folks that are joining us for today's call. So I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the strategies your district has used to address staffing challenges that many districts continue to face.
Yeah, so I am proud to say that we have 100% staff participation and attendance. I attribute that to quite a few things. First, planning early. The administrative team started planning very early and had extensive dialogue with the Board of Education, coupled with, again, collecting that data from those very short, concise 3-4 question surveys. And early on, we found out that we had quite a few teachers who may have had to go on a leave because their own children's schools were not offering in-person instruction. So I work collaboratively with the Board of Education to be able to offer those staff members to bring their children to our district tuition free. And that allowed them to come and have a place for their child to be educated, but then also allow them to remain such a vital part of our program and in their classrooms. We also put in place co-teaching pairs. Some of our staff that do have medical reasons that they can't be in person, we were able to pair them with another staff member. So one is at home, the other staff members in person, and they collaboratively teach in-person classes. We have found that to be quite successful strategy. We also took staff such as our math interventionist, our reading specialist, and placed them in the classroom. We decided early on that we didn't want to do a hybrid model where the teachers in the classroom were teaching students at home and students in person simultaneously. So we put a staff of teachers in the virtual classrooms and a staffing of teachers in the in-person classrooms. And then we do things like the morning meetings and clubs and activities and things like that to make sure that the virtual students and the in-person students feel connected, as well as the virtual teachers and the in-person teachers.
Excellent. That's really interesting. And I know I found that very exciting to talk with you. So I'm sure that a lot of our audience members too will be informed by a lot of those innovative strategies and approaches to really help get that 100% participation rate. That's awesome. So my next question, another common challenge that many schools and school districts have faced is how to support various groups of students with their own unique set of needs. So for example, how does your response to supporting student engagement for kindergartners differ from how you support 8th graders? Or as another example, how can districts effectively support students with disabilities or English language learners? Could you speak to maybe any approaches your district has taken to try to meet the individual needs of different groups of students?
That's a great question. And I could go on and on on this one for hours. I think the most important piece is that right away, the knee-jerk reaction was that people were wondering how they were going to utilize their paraprofessionals. We have found them to be such an amazing asset during the spring and the fall transition. For our students with special needs, they're able to work along, even though they can't physically walk alongside them, they can work alongside them virtually, whether it's in the in-person venue or in the virtual world. We are utilizing the students' paraprofessionals to help keep them on task, and also use some afternoons for them to touch base to make sure that they are keeping on task. So that is definitely one way that we could support our students with special education. Yes, participation and engagement is very different from kindergarten to 8th grade. In our K-2 areas, it's more about being connected with your teachers, your principal, your superintendent. So we've done a great deal of starting in the spring through the summer, and then again in the fall, read alouds in the evening with the principal or the mayor or myself or some teachers, some still working with the PTA for them, while we can't have parties, to bring in a craft and re-evaluate how we're having celebrations. Our Education Foundation, along with myself, donated a pumpkin for every child in grades K through 4, so we could still have a Halloween celebration. And they decorated their pumpkin at their desk. So there it's about really sticking to a lot of the traditions that are familiar to them. And we think that that helps with the social and emotional piece of the things that they really look forward to, trying to find an exciting and innovative way to conduct those. With grades 5 through 8, it's a little different. They're more about wanting to be with each other. And it's really utilizing the student councils, the student senates, in coordination with the principals and myself, to hear the students and not only just listen to what they're saying, but then act on it. Let us know what they're looking for. We've had some bingo events. We've had some, Kahoot trivia events. We have our students in hives and pods. So they've had hive and pod wars where they each have to create something, and they have a time to compete against each other, and there's a winner. So, especially as we already start rounding the corner to the end of the school year, and we talk about our graduating 8th graders, having them really be a part of, what does graduation look like this year? What does your 8th grade dance look like this year? And if you ask them, you'll be very surprised that they come up with the best solutions and the best decisions. So that's what we lean towards here.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like really trying to listen to what those different needs are for the different groups, and then really responding to those needs, and if possible, trying to keep the traditions alive that have been in place in the past, and making sure that those continue, and really in a lot of ways can be student-led. That's great. So my last question for you before we turn to asking more questions that our audience members have asked throughout the presentation. There's been a lot of change in the country's educational landscape over the past year, and we hope that there are lessons that we can take away from this time to really inform the ways that school works whenever things are, quote, back to normal. So to wrap up our conversation, I'm hoping, could you share maybe 1 or 2 lessons that you've learned while operating schools over this past year that will really inform the way that you operate schools even beyond the pandemic?
Absolutely. So, we here, especially in Little Falls, always like to look for the silver lining or the positive in any challenge. And I think even before this pandemic, a lot of us questioned a lot of things that we did and traditions that we had in education, particularly, and tried to take new models and new events and new strategies and standards and fit them into old practices. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be a time for us to really offer true student-centered instruction where student voices are heard and acted upon, whether that's in selecting courses, creating courses. I'd like to see that, really widespread. I also think what's important is really taking a look at how we move students along. Should they be moving along just because they were born prior to October 1st on a certain year, or should we really be looking at innovative ways to group the standards and group the students and move them along according to their ability, challenging them and giving them ways to really expand what they're interested in by meeting and exceeding those standards that are put before them, not so much in a summative way, but in a formative way where we really use assessments and use challenges and applications so that students can demonstrate tasks and give them a purpose instead of I study, I take a test, I get a grade, I move forward, I forget what I memorized. So I think that we really need to really captivate on that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. This was all really interesting and really helpful to hear. So I appreciate you joining us today to talk about that. And there might be some other questions for you as well from our audience members. But speaking of that, we're going to use our last few minutes here to answer some of the questions that have come in. So I'm going to pass it over to Brian Gill, and he's going to help us moderate that time.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Tracy. That was fabulous. Wonderful to hear so many great ideas for strategies. We have had over 50 questions come in the last 45 minutes or so, and I wish we could get to all of them, but we said we'd only take an hour of your time for everybody, and so we'll see if we can get to at least a few of these in the first few minutes. And I want to start with one that I'm sure is of great interest to lots of educators around New Jersey, which is, given that this project was done in partnership with the State Department of Education, here's a question for Tanya from NJDOE, which is, are these strategies going to inform any changes in the expectations that NJDOE has in terms of requirements for districts and schools across New Jersey?
Thank you, Brian, for that question. It's a great question. I think oftentimes when we are presenting information, there could be an impression on the other side that we are expecting districts to implement something new. And the simple answer to that question is no. First and foremost, we understand and we want to acknowledge the hard work that districts and teachers in particular are doing to engage their students in the classroom every day, whether it be asynchronously or synchronously, remotely or through hybrid. We know how challenging these times have been. And so what our hope was in partnering with the REL and Mathematica was really to provide strategies, bright spots, ideas that could potentially be implemented in classrooms, maybe extend upon some of the ideas that districts have already been using. Perhaps there's some new ideas that were heard today. We're really hoping that what you walk away with are some talking points, some conversation starters, that as you engage with your colleagues throughout your districts, you can begin thinking further about, now, what else haven't we tried that we perhaps may have heard today that we might be able to implement to reach certain populations or to reach certain students who we may be struggling with. Not all of these fit in every context. We understand that, but we're hoping that there's something that you can walk away with, one new idea, one fresh idea that you have to consider in making instructional decisions.
Thank you, Tanya. And in fact, a lot of the questions that are coming in from the audience are about these kinds of getting fairly specific on some of the ideas that Kevin and Felicia and Tracy have brought up. Let me go to Tracy for the next question that came in from the audience, which has to do with understanding that student engagement looks different and sounds different in a virtual and hybrid world than it has in the in-person world that we're all used to. And so the question is whether there are some particular ways in which you think it's possible to encourage staff to change their mindset about recognizing what student engagement is in this new instructional world.
Absolutely. I know there's folks on here from all over, but in New Jersey, we have school improvement panels and what once was that I still continue to use district evaluation committees. No matter what you call them, these two groups of people are so incredibly important because we often look outside for our teacher professional development, and our staff has so much to offer. And I think that's oftentimes who they listen to the most, the folks that have been able to walk the same walk as them, in the same halls as them. They know the successes of the district, they know the challenges. And we found that utilizing those groups of folks, whether they make videos and send them out, or they offer professional development after school hours or during faculty meetings, has been so incredibly successful, particularly in making the shift into this, what student engagement looks like, both in not only in a virtual world, but what we have to remember too is when you're in person, student engagement is still going to look different because of the stipulations that are placed on us because of the pandemic. So I urge everyone to utilize their own staff in providing professional development to show best practices and let them shine.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. Let me ask one that's coming in that's relevant to something that Felicia spoke about, which is using phone calls to make family connections. So this person is seeing some reluctance among educators to make phone calls anymore and is interested in hearing more about what we learned about how widespread that use was, how it was encouraged, and what sort of impact it seemed to have in the school that I think you mentioned that was doing a lot of that.
Yeah, I think we heard it had a pretty big impact from at least the one district that we heard about it happening, and actually several, I think, brought it up. I think one of the keys to success here were making it manageable. So it was small groups of students that one particular staff member was responsible for reaching out to. And then I think this is maybe somewhat related. If there are ways, if teachers are reluctant at all, if there are ways to keep their personal contact information to themselves. So there was that app, which honestly, I don't know if you can make calls from it, but if there are resources for teachers to reach out without giving their personal information, possibly could help. So we definitely learned that was useful.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. So we're going to have to come to a conclusion here momentarily, and we have a couple of more minutes just of wrap up that Kevin is going to finish with. Before I turn it over to him, though, just one thing I want to pass on. I'm getting a message here from Diana Pesculi at NJDOE saying that she wants all of you who haven't had a chance to have your questions answered to know that that NJDOE and we at the REL are going to take a close look at those questions, and we're looking forward to trying to figure out if there are additional supports that NJDOE can provide, identified by all of you in the questions you've asked. So thank you for putting those in. You should know that we have documented them, and they will make it to NJDOE even if we didn't have time to address them right now. And with that, let me turn it over to Kevin for a couple of final things, and we'll finish up.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. So in everyone's webinar panel, you should see a resources section. So that section includes a copy of these slides that you can download and take home with you. Or I suppose maybe you keep it at home, since most of us are probably already at home. But in that deck, you'll see contact information to reach both us at the REL as well as folks at the New Jersey Department of Education if you'd like to follow up with any questions. I wanted to just wrap up by thanking you all so much for taking some time to join us today, especially in the midst of such an absolutely crazy time in our world. We hope that you were able to gain a little something from this hour. And I also want to be sure to thank our fantastic team that's really helped us with this work, many of whom are listed here on this slide. So as we close, I do have one final request. At the bottom of your panel, you'll see a teal button, and that button will take you to a very short survey. It only has a couple of questions in it, but that survey is completely anonymous, and getting that info really helps us inform future webinars and be able to improve the work that we're doing. So we'd very much appreciate it if you could take that survey for us. Thank you again so much for your time today. We wish you all continued success and the great work you're doing. Have a great day.